Did you know that, according to the NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, globally, January 2023 was the seventh warmest January in the 174-year NOAA record? According to the NCI's Global Annual Temperature Outlook, it is virtually certain that more than 99.0% that the year 2023 will rank among the 10th warmest years on record. In the Philippines, the Climate Change Commission (CCC) welcomed the inclusion of an accelerated climate change agenda in the Philippine Development Plan, or the PDP 2023 to 2028, saying that it will further strengthen the government's commitment to delivering on key climate actions. There are over 8 billion people on the planet in 2023. If nothing changes, according to experts, there may be 9.7 billion people on the planet by 2050 and 11 billion by 2100. The world population reached 1 billion in the year 1800s after more than 2 million years after 130 years. That number doubled to reach 2 billion in 1930. This number doubled once again in 44 years, reaching 4 billion in 1974. And in just 46 years, the population had nearly doubled once to more than 7.8 billion as of 2020. According to the Commissions on Population and Development, the nation may control its population rise by continuing to develop family planning and reproductive health services. Furthermore, according to 2020 Census of Population and Housing conducted by the Philippine Statistics Authority, according to the Philippine Statistical Authority's 2020 Census of Population and Housing, which was held in 2020, the percentage of Filipino children under the age of 5 decreased from 10.8% in 2015 to 12.6% in 2000. Falling to 10.2% in 2020. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, there were an additional 70 million people living in extreme poverty in 2020, raising the worldwide extreme poverty rate to 9.3%, with 66% of children living in families without working parents. There has been a 60% increase in the number of persons switching between job and unemployment since 2006. The National Anti-Poverty Commission's (NAPC) assembled with its agency members and conducted the Technical Action Officer, Technical Working Group, NAPC, TAO, and TWG, meeting of the government sector at the Philippine Information Agency, headquarters in Quezon City last March 3, 2022. With the aid of its agency and sectoral members, the program's goal is to combat and accelerate the country's reduction in poverty from 18.1% in 2021 to 8 to 9% in 2028, in line with the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. With these problems occurring, what is the answer to these problems? And here we have the sustainable development. So you may ask, what is sustainable development? The development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Economic growth has resulted in problems such as environmental degradation and social disparities. Sustainable development prescribes for a more balanced path for growth that progresses development across three underlying pillars: social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and economic prosperity. So when did all this start? A report was published called Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report. The report was released in 1987 by the United Nations Commissions on Environment and Development and set out the concept of sustainable development for the first time along with its guiding principles. In the Philippines, the United Nations is supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, which we later on will discuss further, organizing its strategic contributions through a 2030 agenda lends into three pillars: people, prosperity, and planet, and peace. It creates decades of close partnership between the Philippines and the United Nations for the achievement of national and global development goals, focusing on areas where the loads of the UN, when working across mandates, will have the greatest jolt to leave no one behind.
So let's head to the SDG, also known as the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the Earth's environment, planets, climate, and ensure that people improve their lives, prospect, peace, and prosperity for everyone and everywhere. It's also the blueprint for us to achieve a better and more sustainable future throughout the world. They also addressed the global challenges we faced, as well as poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. So, when was it made? It was adopted by all United Nations member states along its 193 member countries in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which set out a 15-year plan that addresses 17 global and interconnected issues, including the reduction in poverty and hunger, putting an end to discrimination, preventing the long-term consequences of climate change, and most importantly, to achieve the goals of each United Nations member states. So later on, we will discuss each interconnected issues. The first one is, of course, to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Why? Because poverty has been one of the most problems worldwide. Abolishing extreme poverty for all people everywhere by 2030 is a pivotal goal of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. An example of this is the impact, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic retrograde the steady progress of poverty reduction over the past 25 years. Also, the intensified rising inflation and the impacts of the war in Ukraine. So, number two is zero hunger. So, it is about generating a world free of hunger by 2030. The number of people going hungry and suffering from food insecurity had been gradually rising between 2014 and the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 crisis has pushed those rising rates even higher and has also intensified all forms of malnutrition, particularly in children. So an example of this is in 2020, between 720 million and 811 million persons worldwide were suffering from hunger, roughly 161 million more than in 2019. Number three is good health and well-being. So it is, of course, to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Why? Because ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being at all ages is very essential to sustainable development. Because the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread human suffering. Immunization coverage also dropped for the first time in 10 years, and deaths from tuberculosis and malaria has increased. Urgent and concerted action is needed to set the world back on a trajectory towards achieving this goal. An example of this is, as of mid-2022, COVID-19 had infected more than 500 million people worldwide. The latest estimate shows that global excess deaths, directly and indirectly attributable to COVID-19, could have been as high as 15 million by the end of 2021. So the fourth is quality education, of course, education is really important to this goal because it provides when we have quality education, of course, for everyone, specifically for children and youth. It is we are creating a peaceful and prosperous world. Education gives people the knowledge and skills that they need to stay healthy, get jobs, and foster tolerance. The COVID-19 outbreak, however, has caused a global education crisis. Most education systems in the world have been severely affected by education disruptions and have faced unprecedented challenges. An example of this is, of course, the school closures during the pandemic have affected girls, children, boys from disadvantaged backgrounds, especially those living in the rural areas, children with disabilities, and children from ethnic minorities more than their peers. The fifth one is gender equality. It is to achieve gender equality and empower all women, specifically women and girls. Why? Because gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. And there has been a progress over the last decades, but the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. An example of this is women's health services, or already poorly funded, have faced major disruptions. Violence against women remains endemic. In a 2021 survey in 13 countries, 45% of women reportedly that they or a woman they know has experienced some form of violence since COVID-19. The sixth is clean water and sanitation. It is to ensure access to water and sanitation for everyone. Because access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene is the most basic human need for health and well-being. Decades of misuse, poor management, over extraction of groundwater, and contamination of freshwater supplies have exacerbated water stress. Moreover, demand for water is rising owing to rapid population growth, urbanization, and increasing water needs from agriculture, industry, and energy sectors. An example of this is last 2020, still 2 billion people live without safely managed drinking water services, including 1.2 billion people lacking even a basic level of service in 2020. The seventh is affordable and clean energy. It is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Because the key to the development of agriculture, business, communications, education, healthcare, and transportation is having affordable and clean energy. The lack of access to energy hinders economic and human development. Due to economic pressures imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, up to 90 million people connected to electricity in Africa, and developing countries in Asia could not afford to have an extended bundle of. Eight is decent work and economic growth. It is to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for everyone. Why? Because decent work and economic growth prompts inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for everyone. The pandemic precipitated the worst economic crisis in decades and reversed progress towards decent work for everyone. An example of this is globally 9 million additional children are at risk of being pushed into child labor by the end of 2022 compared to 2020. as a result of rising poverty driven by the pandemic. 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. It is to build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Why? Because economies with diversified industrial sectors and strong infrastructure sustain less damage and are experiencing faster recovery. Example is last 2019, the share of medium and high-tech manufacturing in total manufacturing in Europe and Northern America was 47.7% compared with 21.4% in sub-Saharan Africa and 19.5% in least developed countries. 10 is reduce inequalities. It is to, of course, reduce inequality within and among countries. Why? Because ensuring no one's left behind are integral to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Inequality, on the other hand, within and among countries is a persistent cause for concern. The effects of the COVID-19 pandemic appear to be reversing any positive trends of narrowing income inequality. An example of this is as of May 23, 2022, more than 6 million people in Ukraine had moved to other countries because they want to escape the conflict, with at least 8 million people displaced inside the country.
Sustainable cities and communities is a concept that refers to urban areas that are designed and developed with sustainable principles in mind. Why? The aim is to create cities and communities that are environmentally, socially, and that can provide a high quality of life for their residents. For example, Curitiba, Brazil. The city is known for its urban planning, which pays attention to public transportation, green space, and waste reduction. Responsible consumption and production is a concept that refers to the use of the natural resources in a sustainable and responsible manner. Why? By adopting the responsible consumption and production practice, we can reduce waste, conserve resources, and minimize our impact on the environment. For example, green energies. They have lower the environmental impact than the traditional energy. Climate action. It means step out efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and strengthen resilient and adaptive capacity to the climate-induced impacts. Why? The climate change is caused by the human activities and is building the way we live and the future of our planet. By addressing climate change, we can build a sustainable world for everyone. For example, the city of Oslo in Norway has set a goal of reducing car traffic by 20% by 2019. Life below water. Conserve and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources for the sustainable development. The aim of the life below water is to conserve and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. For example, creating the protected areas in the ocean can help to conserve and restore the marine family and make sure they are sustainable managed. Life on land. It means a life on land is the best for our life on this planet. Why? The aim of life on land is to conserve and restore the ability ecosystem and make sure they are sustainable use for present and the future generations. For example, forests play a crucial role in maintaining the planet's ecological health, regulate the water cycle, and supporting biodiversity. SDG 16 build peaceful and inclusive society based on the respect for human rights, protection of vulnerable groups, rule of law. The aim is to promote peaceful and inclusive society for the sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective and inclusive agencies at all levels. Partnership of goals increase international support for effective and targeted capacity building in the developing countries. Why? The partnership between the governments, personal and public bodies bring our goals closer to achievement. An organization may lessen its negative effect on the environment and improve operational effectiveness by achieving an EAS, which is a collection of procedures and methods. For small enterprise, the business sector, as well as urban, state, and government, this website offers tools and information about the EAS. EAS is done when an organization decides to lessen its negative effects on the environment and improve operational effectiveness, which is a collection of procedures and methods. This offers small enterprise, personal sector, urban and state provide information and tools for setting out an EAS, with the importance of minimizing the agency's environment impact. The EPA continues to make progress in creating and maintaining an environmental management system at each of its offices.
The first step in an EMS is to establish an environmental policy that reflects the organization's commitment to environmental performance. The goal of this step is to establish a clear direction for environmental management to communicate that direction to all stakeholders. The second step in an EMS is to conduct an environmental review and develop an environmental management plan. The goal of this step is to identify the organization's significant environmental aspects, evaluate their impact, and develop strategies to mitigate or prevent negative impacts. The third step in an EMS is to implement the environmental management plan. The goal of this step is to put the plan into action and ensure that all employees and stakeholders are aware of the roles and responsibilities. The fourth step in an EMS is to regularly monitor and evaluate the organization's environmental performance. The goal of this step is to identify opportunities for improvement and to address any issues that arise. Checking and correction may involve conducting regular audits, analyzing data, and reviewing compliance with relevant environmental regulations. And for our last step, the fifth step is to conduct a management review of organization's environmental management system. The goal of this step is to evaluate the effectiveness of them and to identify opportunities for improvement. And there are examples of Republic Acts for EMS. Republic Act 6969, Toxic Substances, Hazardous and Nuclear Waste Control Act of 1990. Republic Act 9003, Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2000, Clean Air Act of 2004.